Okay, it has now clicked on to 12:32, so we'll make a start. So I will just welcome you all to today's session. It is being recorded. Please keep yourselves on mute unless you want to ask a question. You can raise your hand, put it in the chat, or presumably, do you want people just to speak out, Ruth?
Yep, I'm happy to put hands up, speak out, whichever works. That's fine.
Okay.
I'm not precious.
Excellent. So I will hand over to the delightful Ruth Hobbs. And I'm just so grateful that she's been able to do a session for us on running a kick. Thanks, over to you, Ruth.
Thanks, Sarah. Welcome, everyone. Just to let you know, I have got an extra screen open. So if I'm looking to the side, it's not because I'm getting distracted. It's just I'm checking in case anyone's got their hands up. Hopefully, we won't have any technical problems today, but you all know what it's like with these types of platforms. So if it does go a little bit wrong, just hold in there and we'll get it sorted. We have the lovely Helen in the background who's going to be doing all our technology and working for us on that area. There is chat function, so please do feel free to use that if you want to. Okay, so as Sarah's already mentioned, the session is going to be recorded and it will be uploaded onto the Parent Participation YouTube channel afterwards. So just be aware of that if you are asking any questions and don't want your area identified, or if you don't want to be on camera, just make sure that your camera is switched off. We have put some time in towards the end for you to be able to ask any questions, and I'll try and answer those for you. Sarah has asked if we can be muted, obviously, because of the recording, so that we can try and minimise that background noise as well. And then at the very end of the session, you will get a link to a feedback survey, which we ask you to take a couple of minutes to complete. For those of you that are not familiar with Zoom, we know there are so many different platforms now. Just a quick reminder of how to use your microphone and video, and obviously you can see who else is in the session by clicking on the little people icon, and if you do need to leave, then obviously it's the button over here. Okay, so just to start off, I'm going to be completely honest and transparent. I am not a legal expert when it comes to CICs. This is based very much on my knowledge of setting up and running a CIC in Somerset and working with several forums, including the lovely Julia, around setting up CICs in other areas. So ultimately, what you need to remember with a CIC is that it is a company, and you are going to have to follow all of the standard company law. The difference with a CIC compared to a lot of companies is that their main primary purpose is to be of community benefit, and it cannot be for profit. Once you've set up a CIC, you'll be established as a brand company, and that is really important to start thinking about how you want to be seen within your community. But a CIC operates in the same way as any other company. So you have to comply with all of the VAT laws, all of the corporation tax, employment laws, etc. So some of the characteristics of a limited company, including a CIC, is that you are able to be a separate legal entity. So that means that the company itself can enter into contracts, it can own property, it has the ability to be able to borrow money and to be able to fundraise in its own right. So, for example, when you enter into contracts without a legal structure, it is the person that's signing the contract that then becomes responsible. Whereas if you are a company, then it is the company that takes on that liability. So a few examples for you of some CICs that have been set up, and I've purposely picked ones that aren't forums. So these are examples. You can go and have a look. There are case studies on the government website that talks about these and how they've set themselves up. So the first one is book donors, and they actually take secondhand books and they use those to support charities and libraries. The next one is quite similar. So it's an expert patients program, which is actually around supporting people with long-term medical conditions and how they manage those. And then the last one, you will get these slides, by the way, so you don't have to make copious amounts of notes, don't worry. And they do have links to all these case studies. The last one is Little Fish Theatre, and they are actually a centre that works around theatre productions and drama for young people. And that's set up in the London area. So there's some case studies that you can go and have a look at how they set up, how they run, and that will give you a wider idea of some of the CICs outside of parent carer forums. So the first thing that you need to really understand is the concept of community within the forum of a CIC. So you can choose what your community is. So your community could be the whole population. It could be based on a location. So it could be, for example, your geographical area, or it could be a particular district within an area. And it could be based on a particular need. So the concept of community is quite wide within a CIC, but you do need to be clear about that. And we'll talk a bit more around that. What a CIC cannot do is it cannot be for the financial advantage of a group of people. So it can't be just a few people get together and it's for their benefit. It cannot have political purposes, and it cannot be set up for the benefit of employees, directors, any members, or a single organisation. So following on from that, all CICs have to fulfil the community interest test. It basically is a duty that you have around your company being for public benefit and community purpose. You have to be able to satisfy the regulator that any reasonable person would understand that your CIC activities were for the benefit of the community. You cannot satisfy that if you are carrying on certain political activities, or if it is deemed that a reasonable person wouldn't be able to see that it is for the public and that it could be deemed as being for a particular body or employees. This isn't a one-off test. This is a continual test that you have to be able to prove over the entire time that you are a CIC. So you can't set up a CIC for a community purpose and then change it. You have to be really conscious of that and really conscious that that test has to continue all the time. So with that in mind, there are certain activities that the legislation says that CICs are not eligible to do. So you cannot be a political party, you cannot be involved in political campaigning, and you can't be a subsidiary of one of those groups. It also states that there's a wide range of political activities will be regarded as not being carried on for the benefit of the community. So you need to think about how that sits with some of the work that you do as forums, and make sure that if you do go down the route of becoming a CIC, that you couldn't have challenge around your activity. We're very clear that the DFE funded grant can't be used for campaigning, but actually it's just remembering as part of CIC, any funding that you get from anybody cannot be used for that purpose.
Ruth, I've got a question in the chat.
Sure.
What is meant by political?
Well, that's a good question, isn't it? So if you are, we've never had any problems with the regulator if you share things. So for example, contacted their campaign a little while ago around transport, school transport. Sharing that has not ever been an issue. When they start talking about campaigning, they're talking about placards outside of public buildings type campaigning, if that makes sense, and political. So we know as PCFs, we say politically neutral, so we don't favour any particular party, and that is one of the key things around a CIC. You cannot be seen to be favouring one political party over another. So you couldn't be doing political rallies, things like that. There is a whole load of guidance, and when we get to the end of the presentation, there are some resources that you can go and have a look at, and that explains it much more in depth. So the other thing to think about is that CICs do have a regulator, and they have some key responsibilities. So they will decide whether a CIC can be set up, whether it can continue, or whether it needs to close, and they will investigate any complaints regarding a CIC and take any action that is necessary. So they consider the applications to make sure that they do meet the criteria to be a CIC. They do a lot of promotional work about CICs, how to set up CICs. They provide guidance. If you go onto Companies House, there is so much guidance, so many step-by-step guides that explain it all. Being honest, there is a real risk that you could then end up getting a little bit overwhelmed. So just pace yourself when you're doing it. They're the ones that issue the certificate to say that you've incorporated, and then they do a light touch regulation, and they try to keep their what they call their interference to a minimum. So they will only get involved if they actually have to. So we're going to have a think now about some of the things that you need to understand before setting up a community interest company. So these are some of the things that are real core elements that you need to think about beforehand. So the first one is around directors. So because it is a company, you will have to have company directors, and there are regulations around who can be a director. So for the majority of this presentation, we will be focusing on the first one because we will be looking at individuals rather than partnerships or groups or organizations, because that doesn't fit with the parent care world that we're in. So who can be a director? So basically, for a CIC, you must have at least one director. A director must be 16 and they cannot be disqualified from being a director. They don't necessarily have to live in the UK, but companies would have to have a UK registered address. You're not allowed to be a company director if you've been struck off for any reason, if you have had bankruptcy, or if you are under a debt relief order. And they can ban people. And if you're not sure, there is a list on Companies House that you can go in and you can actually search to see if anyone is on the disqualified list. So that being said, it's important to understand some of the responsibilities that a director has, because if you do not fulfill these responsibilities, then you can be struck off. So we will go into detail a bit more about some of these. So they may sound a bit strange at the moment, but you need to be able to file a confirmation statement, which really sets out what your company's doing, any changes, who's in control. You need to submit your annual accounts. So that's even if the company is dormant, you still have a requirement to do that. And it's important to say at this point that you can get somebody to support you with that. So you can use an accountant, but in law, it's not the accountant that is responsible. It is still the directors of the company. You have to notify them if there's any change in officers or personal details. You need to tell them if you've moved, if you're moving address. If you've got shares, you need to manage that. If you have got any mortgages or restrictions or registrations of charges on it, you have to also notify them of that. We will talk a little bit about persons with significant control later, but you need to make sure that you're updating that, and there are scales for you to do that. And on top of all of that, you may need to also file a company tax return to HMRC and pay any corporation tax on profits. That probably sounds really daunting. In reality, it's not as bad as it sounds. So next thing we're going to do is I've just got a little video for you to watch. Hopefully this will work. I'm going to stop sharing screens, switch this one. Can you see now?
Yes.
Fabulous.
And I can hear.
Fantastic.
As a director, you're legally responsible for running your company. As part of your role, there are important duties you must fulfill to stay compliant. These include making sure information is sent to us on time, running your company responsibly, and keeping up to date with changes to UK company law. You're personally responsible for keeping company records up to date, even if someone else, like an accountant, files the information on your behalf. You need to file a confirmation statement at least once a year to confirm that the details we have for your company are correct. You also need to file annual accounts, even if your company is dormant or non-trading. You'll need to tell us about any changes to your company, such as a change of address, company officers, or shareholder information. You'll also need to make sure the details we hold for your company's people with significant control, PSCs, are still correct. Alongside your responsibilities to us, other general duties you must perform as a director include following your company's constitution, promoting its success, and avoiding conflicts of interest. With new and upcoming changes to UK company law, it's important to stay informed to make sure your company stays compliant. You can find more information about being a company director on gov.uk.
That gives you a bit of an overview of some of the things that you are required to do as a director. Right, I will stop sharing. I have to reshare again, sorry. Bear with me. Okay, so one of the other things that comes out quite often is, can directors be paid or volunteer? So we're going to have a look at that. With trustees in charities, there are specific rules around the fact that trustees, as a general rule, cannot be paid. That doesn't apply to directors. So the first thing that we need to think about is that some people may not want to be remunerated at all, and therefore they may just want to be a volunteer, and that is absolutely fine. If they choose to just be a volunteer and they don't want to be paid, that is an option. However, there are a lot of CICs that, because they also will be trading, need to have directors in place to be able to keep the business going. And that's what you've got to remember. At the end of the day, a CIC is a business. And usually they want to pay people to be able to do that, so that they are ensuring that they are keeping those people in role. The things that you need to think about from a CIC perspective is that if you are paying your directors, they will be checking to make sure that that payment is not disproportionate. So you cannot pay the majority of the funds coming in out to directors, for example. It has to be sustainable. Your company has to be sustainable and be able to move forward. If the regulator expects that the majority of the company profits and surplus are not being reinvested in the community, then they will investigate that. So when your profit comes in from CIC, then that should be being fed back into the benefit of your community and shouldn't be paid to directors or shareholders. So directors can be paid. Sometimes it's the easiest way of doing that is to put directors onto a salary. Their remuneration should never be more than what is reasonable. Arrangements for paying directors should be transparent. And one of the things that you will be expected to do is to report that back. And that the regulator, and just remember, the regulator can take activity. So when you are thinking about paying directors, you need to hold those things in your mind. Things that you need to think about, and there is a lot of guidance again on the government website. I would also recommend that you check out the employment checker as well on the government website. So directors can be paid. Again, you need to make sure it's done responsibly and it aligns with the company's missions. You need to ensure that on your CIC 34 report that you have to complete annually, you put how much has been paid to directors. You do not have to do that at an individual level. It is a collective figure for all of the directors together. Any of the directors' duties that are being performed under the rules of the Companies Act, they have to be paid as PAYE. It is possible for a director, or as HMRC refers to it as an officer role, to also be an employee. So you need to be clear about that, and actually if they've got employee rights as well. So that's a bit of a complicated one. You can technically be employer and employee. One of the things that I'd say is some people have gone down the line of self-employed. It is possible to be self-employed as a director. It is challenging to do that, and I would suggest that if you are considering going down that line, you get advice so that you do not end up being in breach. So this is the guidance from the government around the test that would be used to determine if a person is self-employed for benefits purposes. And this is quite helpful for us to think about. So the test is that actually the person has to be able to not be in a position where the profits from the company are restricted, such as a community interest company with an asset lock. So thinking about that, that's where it can become quite difficult to prove the self-employed bit. So if you are thinking of going down the self-employed line, then I would suggest that you do look at getting some legal advice around that. If the regulator feels that you've breached it and that you are breaching your asset lock, then they can take action and you can be struck off as a director. So it is worth just getting that advice from a legal expert. And there are several companies out there that can help with that.
There's a question in the chat,
Okay.
Ruth. And it's is this limited to acting as a director in that role?
In an officer role.
Yeah, I'm not quite
Sorry,
sure.
Sam, do you want to just turn
Yeah.
your microphone on and just explain a bit more? Is that all right?
Yeah, can you hear me all right?
Yeah.
Okay, so as part of the CIC, you've obviously got the director acting in the role of the director, ensuring that you're compliant with law, etc., etc.
Yes.
But then they can also act as a representative and
Yes.
sit on work streams, etc. So is that remunerated differently, or is that classed as remunerating a director?
So this is where it becomes very tricky. And this is why I said, if you are going to go down this line, you need to get advice, because you can pay for elements of services being delivered by a director that is not a direct role. So for example, the example they use on government website is that you could have a CIC director who is being paid PAYE for their director role and fulfilling that role, but they may then be self-employed to do a piece of work. And they advise on the government website that if you are going to go down that line, then you need to get legal advice.
Okay, that makes sense, because
yeah, it is tricky.
we determine that we're not paid for the role of director.
Yes.
If we participate in work streams along with the other representatives, which is a separate role, then we remunerate for that on a either PAYE or self-employed basis after doing all the checks.
Yeah, so that's where you need to check it. And I would just get advice if you're not sure, then, and you need to evidence everything, because if you were challenged by the regulator, you need to be able to provide that evidence of that you've done your due diligence around the decision that you've made. And it is really tricky. I know from our perspective, we took advice from HMRC, and I spoke to 3 different people at HMRC, and every single one gave me a different bit of advice, which was really helpful. So I think it is just about getting, and whatever decision you make, making sure that you have a sound reason for it, that it is in the best interest of your community and the reason that you're set up, and that you have got your evidence base as to why you've made that decision. Does that help, Sam?
Yeah, sorry, I was searching to unmute. Yes, it does. That's really helpful. Thank you very much.
No problem. Okay, so a core element of a CIC is an asset lock. So basically it is a legal clause that means that you as a company cannot be making any gain out of any of the things that you've got. So that can be money that's coming in, it could be items, and they all have to be used for the benefit of your local community, however you've set it up in your documents. So this is where a CIC will differ from a normal limited company, because you cannot transfer assets, you cannot donate them, you have to have everything has to be documented, if that makes sense. The other thing that you need to think about is that if assets are being loaned into a CIC from another organisation or from individuals, you need to make sure that's documented, because if it is not documented, it becomes an asset of the CIC. So just think about that, and understanding the asset lock is really important, because it's thinking about things like if you were to close this forum, what happens to what's left over? Okay. So if you do need to transfer assets, then there are certain circumstances you can do that. So if like you're settling debts and you need to do that, you can, but you have to have been able to satisfy one of those 4 areas. So that it is full market value, that it's been made to another asset lock body, it's been made to another body, but had consent from the regulator, and it's been made for the benefit of the community. So thinking about everything that belongs to your forum, all of the funding that comes in, any technology you've got, all of that is part of your asset lock, and all of that has to be for the community benefit. So when you are thinking about setting it up, one of the other things that you need to think about is who are you going to nominate to take on your assets if you close. So for example, if you have laptops, computers, technology in your office space, just as an example, who are you going to nominate? So it's quite common if you look in articles of association for CICs that you will see lots of forums have then nominated another local forum in their region to be the person that would get them if they were to close. Also have to remember that some of the items that are purchased through the DFE grant within a period of time would actually be part of that grant terms, so they would have to be returned. And if you're not sure about that, you can talk to the grants team and you can talk to one of your contact advisors, and they'll be able to advise you around that. Obvious things, it sounds obvious, but they have written it down. So I'm going to say you cannot nominate yourself to be the recipient if you close. So you can't nominate the company. If the company closes, you can't say we're going to take the assets. So it's just thinking about all of those sides of things and thinking about actually who are you going to nominate, and also having a conversation with them before you put them in, because actually there may be things that they then need to process if you were to close and those assets were passed across. So before you establish a community interest company, there are a few things that you will have to decide. The first thing, you will need to define your community. Now, hopefully as a parent carer forum, that should be relatively easy to do because you have a very clear outline already of the people that you are working for. So you will need to think about that, and you'll need to think about how you're going to word that. The other thing that you need to think about is actually your activities. So what is it that you're going to be doing? Again, hopefully that will be relatively clearly defined around the participation, but there may be other things that you're doing for other grant funders. So we know lots of forums now are starting to look at other funding sources like National Lottery, getting funding from their local authority or health areas. So it's thinking about actually all of those different funding streams and what is the activity that you're undertaking. Who's basically going to be running the company? Who is going to be the directors? Well, what is your funding source? So how is your funding coming in? And that's really important, because if you are grant funded solely, you need to think about that, because one of the elements is around trading and actually making income for a CIC. So thinking about actually if we're completely grant funded, what else are we going to do? What is our forward plan? How will any surpluses or profits that you might make be used? Again, you need to think about that element as to whether you're going to be involved in campaigning or political activities, because you wouldn't be eligible to become a CIC. Who's going to be nominated to be your asset lock if you were to close? And then will your company with a limited liability have all of those things that you need? Is this the type of company that suits you? So is having an asset lock, having limited liability, are those the things that actually are going to suit your needs now as a forum? So I popped up a few examples of some of the objects that are in some of the parent carer forums articles of association. There's a couple of slides that really just simply outline what it is that is their role, what it is that they are aiming to do, their objectives. So if you are considering becoming a CIC, it is worth just going on to Companies House. All of the articles associations for any of the CICs are available, so you can have a little look at what other forums have put and just get a feel for some of the things that they might have put into theirs that might be useful for you to use. So the next thing you need to think about is, are you going to be limited by shares or are you going to be limited by guarantee? You have to be one or the other. So these are the questions that you need to think about. Do you want to be able to pay dividends? So do you want to be able to make a payment from the company to people that are investing in it? Will the ability to pay dividends have a favourable effect on your funding or tax status? do you understand the cap limitations and how it all works? If you understand that and your answer is a yes, then you may choose that actually a limited by shares option is the best option for you. I have not actually come across a forum that's gone for this option yet, I'm going to be honest. The majority of forums go for a limited by guarantee. So a limited by guarantee will reduce down how much personal liability there are for the debts of the company. So a lot of the ones that you will see if you go onto Companies House talk about being responsible to pay £1 if something went wrong and the company had to close. Will you be looking at funding for a CIC? So funders tend to be more favourable to applications from CICs that are limited by guarantee rather than by shares. And it is one of the more traditional models. So just thinking about actually, is that the right model for us? It is important that you get this right and that you think about it, because actually you cannot change. So if you go down the line of becoming limited by shares, you can't switch to limited by guarantee and vice versa. You would have to close and re-establish. So we're going to go through a few of the documents that you would need to complete. The easiest way of doing it now is to do it all online. It's much quicker to do it all online. You don't have to, the paperwork side of things is much lighter. It does quite a lot of it and pulls all the information for you. So the first thing that you need is a memorandum of association. So it's basically a one-page document where the people that are setting up the CIC are the ones that then are assigned to say that they are basically setting up the company. That stays on your records at Companies House and doesn't change. And you submit it alongside your article of association. So I have put a link at the bottom when you get the slides, and you will be able to go on and find out more information about this. There are model ones on there, so you do not have to create it yourself. It is very simple. You just literally follow the ones that are on there if you choose to do a paper one. If you choose to do an online version, you just have to enter the details of who are the original directors that are setting up the company. Once it is set up, you do have to keep that memorandum at your registered office address. So the other thing to think about is your type of membership, and there are two basic types of membership. So there is a large membership and there is a small membership. That sounds very complicated. It really isn't. Small membership, directors, large membership, outside of the directors as well. That's the easiest way of thinking of it. A lot of forums have chosen to go for small membership and then consider how they get the views of their wider group of parents involved in that process. All members will have some rights around voting and how the company runs, so you need to think about that as well. The other thing that you need to do is you need to write your articles of association. Again, this feels like a massive big thing, but there are templates on the government website to help you go through this, and it will be different depending on whether you've got a small membership or a large membership, whether you've chosen to be limited by guarantee or limited by shares. So there are different ones out there. And you will have some of these are the things that you will need to put in there. So the powers and responsibilities of the directors, some of the rights and duties of members, how you're going to use profit, how you appoint and remove directors, all of those things need to be outlined in there. And as you go through the templates, they give you options for you to choose. So you can just follow through the templates and make those decisions. But you do need to discuss that as a group beforehand and make sure that you've got that minuted, particularly if you're going from one type of governance structure over to this. So if you're setting up a brand new forum and you go straight for a CIC one, you might choose to be, that might be your first starting point, but for the majority of forums they will have been a constituted group beforehand or another form of structure and then be moving into this. So you need to make sure that you are following the governance that you already have in place as a group and making sure that that is recorded and that it is done according to your existing governance to then be able to move into being a CIC.
Quick question, Ruth.
Yep.
In terms of the address of the KIC, does it have to, can it be a personal address?
It can be a personal address, absolutely. What you do have to think about if you choose to use a personal address is your personal address will be visible for everybody to see on Companies House. Your registered address has to be visible. The other way around it is there are companies that you can have like almost like a PO box arrangement, and you can use that. So if you didn't want to use if you didn't have an office, you can have a virtual office in effect, and you pay a nominated fee each year to be able to use that as your registered address. So that is another way around it if you don't have an office, rather than using a personal address if you don't want everybody knowing where you live. Okay, confirmation statement. So each year you have to do a confirmation statement, and you have to confirm with Companies House that the information that they hold on file is correct. You have so many days to do it. They give you notice and you've got to complete it online. It sounds complicated. It really isn't. And it probably takes, Julia, what do you reckon? 5-10 minutes to complete it? It's not very long at all, is it? So yeah, it's just about making sure though that you keep it up to date, that you are doing it if any changes come. So for example, if you move address or if there's changes in who has significant control. So we are going to go through this now. I've added this in because this is an area that I see go wrong quite a lot. And with some of the forums that I've worked with, they haven't really understood fully the person with significant control. Most people instantly would say that they understand around shares. So if you have more than 25% shares in the company, most people would understand that actually that could be deemed as having a significant control of the company. What people tend to forget is voting rights. So we'll talk a little bit later on about structure and how you can involve wider groups. But actually, if you've got more than 25% of the voting rights, so say you've got 3 directors, then actually you are a person of significant control, and that has to be registered with Companies House. If you have the right to appoint or remove a majority of the board of directors, again, you are a person with significant control. And if that changes for any reason, you have to notify Companies House within 14 days. So limited, sorry, I'm just having a quick look. Someone's put, what if you are limited by guarantee? Can you give me a bit more context on that? Sorry.
Sorry, I think I'm misunderstanding. So
Okay,
25% of voting rights. So with your voting rights, it's just 1 vote per director, no?
it is, but if you only
you
have
then
3
break it into a
directors,
percentage. I see. Sorry.
Yeah.
Yes.
yes, if you have 3 directors, you've all got 33% in effect, and a bit.
Right. Okay.
So you would have more than 25%. So you have to put it down as having significant control of the decision making around the company. Does that make sense? No, it's fine. It is very, very complicated. And I expect by this point, most people's heads are probably aching, if I'm honest. That's why you're going to get the slides afterwards. So the other thing that you have to do is you do have to report annually your accounts, and you have to do a report of activity as well. So those are 2 things that have to be done. Again, you are given deadlines around that. You can move your deadlines as well. That's something worth saying, because actually you can align them. So some forums have chosen to align their reporting, their accounts, for example, with their grant period. So you're only doing 1 lot of accounts each year that you then can submit to Companies House and prepare for your grant monitoring as well. So thinking about that, you can do that, and it might be worth just having a look at aligning some of those. So for the CIC report, this is the minimum requirement. So you need to detail what you've done for the benefit of your community, how you've consulted with stakeholders around the activities that you've done, details of any director's remuneration. So as I said, that goes in as a lump sum, and then information of any assets that you might have transferred, so that you've got a record of that as well. On top of that, you also have to do any other reporting that you would normally do. So you will still have to do all of your grant monitoring. You will still need to report to any of your other funders, and back to your parent carer community about the work that you've done. So if we think about stakeholder engagement, the CIC report asks for details about actually what have you done to benefit the community? Who have you consulted? So things like your parent carer surveys, your coffee sessions that parents have come along to, all of those are examples of how you may have consulted with your stakeholder group. I do hate the term stakeholder, but it's what they use, sorry. The other thing to think about is how have you made sure that they are involved? So that could be as simple as sending newsletters out to having them attending meetings. So thinking about actually how have you involved your community? It's important to think about this because it is an absolute must for a CIC that you have to be able to think and evidence that you have involved your stakeholder community group in what you have done over the course of the year. So as part of your engagement, you'll need to consider how you're going to work with a wider group of parents and not end up in a situation where you just have 2 or 3 directors making decisions. So as we said, you can technically set up a CIC with just 1 director. So you need to think about how you might want to include parents who want to be involved at a leadership level, but aren't able to be a director for various reasons. So the law is very clear. The responsibility of the company and decision-making sits with directors in law, but you as directors can choose how you want to engage wider. So some of the examples might be that actually you want to set up a steering group or a reference group or a committee. It's good practice if you do that to outline how you're going to do it and put that in writing so that everybody is clear. Although that is not a legally binding document, it does signal to your community how you intend to run and how you intend to operate. So some of the things that you might want to think about is actually what are the aims of the role of the group? What do you want that reference or steering group to do? Structure of that group. So how many are going to be in it? Are you going to have any associate positions? So you might have people that are on the steering group from other groups, organisations. They may or may not have voting rights. Also thinking about what is the decision-making powers and what is that in comparison to directors. So at the bottom, you will see that although directors are, as I said, responsible in law, they do have the option to allow a wider group to be involved in making that decision. So this is an example, and I can tell you this is an example from our steering group document. So the directors of our forum retain the right to veto a decision in exceptional circumstances. So that is another, well, we don't like it, so we're not doing it. That is an exceptional circumstance. And that is basically if it could bring the company into disrepute, if it's illegal, or if it is deemed to carry an unacceptable level of risk. And that is to protect the fact that the directors legally are the ones that are responsible for what happens to the company. So I can honestly say we've been a CIC since 2016 and I've never had to bring that into force ever. But it is just about actually making it really clear who has what power and when. Outlining frequency of meetings, when are they going to happen, how are they going to happen, where is it going to be? How do people add things to the agenda? Are there any things that have to be on every agenda? So standard items might be things like finance, for example. You might have policies that have to go at certain times a year. Your steering group membership requirements. So that would be a place where you might want to say, actually, to be a member on the steering group, you need to be a parent carer of a child between birth and 25, living in X area. How people can apply and how people can resign. So very similar to probably what you've got in place in a lot of your constitutions already. So this morning, well, lunchtime session may make your brain feel a little bit like that because it's an awful lot of information and there is a lot to think about. So there's some useful support that's available out there. So we obviously know that we have access to community matters and John's really good and can help talk through and support with documentation. There's also an organisation that I've worked with on several CICs called MMC that are based in the Southwest, a lovely lady called Marsha. She's very good and she's also available to support and help as well, bearing in mind that there could be some cost for both of those supports. There is a load of guidance on the Companies House website. There's a do's and don'ts document, which is really good about the application and can help you to avoid some of the common errors that come up. And then there's a step-by-step guide on how to set up a CIC that discusses in more detail all of the things that we have covered off this morning. So it is now time for any questions that you might have, or anything that you just want to check, or you might all just need to go and lie down in a dark room because of the amount of information. Victoria.
I'm a bit confused. You said something about the grants being the main income stream or something like that, and then you couldn't talk about. I didn't understand it. Well, why do we need profit? Sorry, perhaps that's basically the question.
So
why can't we just have grants?
Why can't you have grants? So one of the things that normally comes up with CIC, and you will be asked this by a lot of funders. So for example, if you went for something like national lottery funding, or you go for different funding outside of the contact grant, a lot of the funders, because of CICs, are expected to think about trading. And that's the whole point of being a company, is that you can have that ability to trade if you choose to do so. They will ask the question about how you're going to generate income.
So how might we as a PCF before we're going
so
to
you
do
can
the same stuff
fundraise
just as a CIC? Okay, we can just do fundraise.
You can fundraise, yep, so that's one way. And it can be simple things like having, and I know it sounds really silly, but it is just literally simple things like you could have pots on the table when you run coffee sessions that people can donate. All of that type of thing is stuff. But you have to obviously be conscious that if you do make a profit, then you are liable for corporation tax.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
I can just add, Ruth, that in terms of getting support to set up a KIC or with different aspects of running it, you can also use the priority grant. Should we be awarded the contract next year and there be grants and priority grants, then you'll be able to apply for a priority grant to help you with the costs of finding someone to support you to set up. And sometimes some of our amazing associates like Ruth have really good sort of experience that we can draw on. So sometimes we can use some of our associate budget to pay for that. But yeah, talk to your regional advisor.
Any other question? Phil's popped a camera on. Phil, have you got a question? Or just show me your lovely face because you're here today. Nice to see you. It is a lot of information. It can feel really daunting when you first start out doing it. And I think my advice is take it slowly. There are also organisations probably local to you that can support. So when we were choosing what structure we wanted to go for, we had our local voluntary community sector support organisation come in and do some work with us to start thinking about not just what we need now, but actually where do we want to be in the future. So that's the other thing to think about when you're thinking about what structure, where do you want to be in 3-5 years time. Just checking that it's good practice to appoint a chair for the board. It is good practice to appoint a chair. What I would also say is if you have a steering group, your directors don't have to be the chair. You can have somebody else within that steering group be the chair. I keep emphasizing that in mind. Somebody else can be the chair. So laughing because she knows what I'm like. But actually you can make, it can be somebody that is not a director that chairs your steering group and takes on that responsibility. But yes, having a chair is helpful, just not because they are taking all of the responsibility or taking all of the lead, but actually just somebody who is making sure that meetings stay on time and on track is really helpful.
Ruth, can I say something?
Yeah, of course you can.
It does bear consideration. So we became a KIC a couple of years ago and we have a steering group. What we are currently being, we have somebody helping us with doing an organizational strategy for the next 3 years. And actually, when it came up, when he was investigating what we have at the moment, he said that our steering group felt a little bit more like a staff meeting.
Yeah.
So what we're struggling with a minute, and what we're trying to work out, is to find the balance where it's right and proper and good practice, but it isn't tokenistic. You know, and he has spoke about us possibly having, you know, a board or a different type of thing where you would get like other community leaders to be able to be involved in it. But actually, it's a bit of a minefield, and it's
yeah,
a lot.
it is.
And you know, at the moment, those steering group meetings, it takes up a lot of capacity, which we know forums, just with the day-to-day work, capacity is always something. So it needs to have value and not be tokenistic and serve a function, and actually finding the one thing that can be all those things is quite tricky.
Yeah. So things like your steering group really should be helping to set the budget for the year. They should be helping to develop what your plan is for the year. What are your priorities? All of those things should be going through your steering group or reference group. It shouldn't be just a couple of people that are making those decisions, that are directors. So it's about how do you do that, and how do you do that widely. I think as well, one of the things that we do all fall into the trap of is, I think, because we are so busy as PCFs, is it's great to hear that you're taking that reflection time and looking at it, Phil, because so many areas we just keep doing, we're so busy. And actually it's taking the development time and having development sessions, because for some of the people that are coming onto our board, they may never have done this type of thing before. They may never have been on a board before. So actually giving them the opportunity to develop the skills so that they can understand things like the budget and the finance and how do grants work and what is our strategy for the next 3 years. All of those things are really important for your board to be able to understand. And it may be that you need to do some development work with the board to get them into a position where, like you said, it doesn't feel like it's just a tick box exercise, that they're coming along and going, yep, we'll do whatever the directors want to do. If that makes sense.
For sure.
So I'm just having a look, not really understanding what would be considered profit for tax. Any money left over at the end of the year would stay in the CIC going forward year on year. It would. However, if you have any money left, say, for example, at the end of the year, you had £5,000, although it's going back into your group, it would be classed as profit for that year. So you would be liable for corporation tax unless it was grant carried over. You have to be really careful with corporation tax. People have been stung before. If you're not sure, talk to HMRC. They will give you guidance around corporation tax. And John, I have to admit, John at Community Matters has got his head around that brilliantly, and he's also got his head around VAT. So if you are confused in any way, shape or form, I'm shamelessly going to plug poor John, who probably will kill me afterwards. But he is very good and has got his head around that side of things, because it is just getting that and understanding that. Is there a profit threshold for paying corporation tax? Again, you need to go through and check. I'm not going to give advice on that because there's legal implications. Check on the government website. It gives you all of the indications as to when you do or don't have to pay corporation tax. There are considerations, because if you've made losses in previous years, that can be offset against the year that you're in. So if you are going to enter into this, my advice would be very strongly get yourself an accountant that is used to working with CICs and charities. It's worth money and will save you a lot of headache and stress.
Ruth, there's a question earlier about it's kind of clear on process and support, but not clear why we would do this in addition to trying to run a PCF. What are the benefits?
Oh, what, being a CIC?
How have people formed their steering group? Yeah.
Yeah, so for us, we chose, so I'm going to be absolutely honest, when I took over as chair at the forum in Somerset, I got very nicely greeted the next morning after being voted in to sign all the documents, taking on £46,000 against my own name, which made me rock slightly, as you can imagine. So at that point, it's like, right, we need some legal structure. So that enables me not to be the one that is liable for it, but the company is, which is quite nice. And that just gives me a little bit of peace of mind. For the steering group, I would say personally, having had a steering group all the way through, they are invaluable. We have 3 directors, which is great because it always means that there is an odd person if we do have to make votes. But actually, having that wider breadth of knowledge and wider experience is really, really valuable. They have totally different perspectives on things. As directors, you literally will be so focused on this is how we run things and we have to do this, this and this to comply with all of the regulations. But actually, they will come back and they will be able to be your voice and your ears and to be able to say, actually, we know when we're looking at our work plan, we need to do a piece of work over here with this community because this is what we're hearing. So it's that how you get that wider engagement and make sure that your forum is able to represent your area and that you don't get burnout. That's the other thing, and everything falling on just a few people. Does that make sense? Gemma, did that make sense or any more? Did you have anything further you wanted to know on that one? Made sense. Fabulous. That always helps. Okay. Any other questions? Okay, I've just got a last couple of slides that I'm going to share. Okay, so just as a bit of a reminder, obviously, if you do have any questions that are related to your forum, then you have your advisor to go to, or you can contact the parent participation email. Also, if you've got any send issues and you need some advice, use the contact helpline. I think sometimes as forums, we forget that's there for us as well. If we're having questions, we can phone them up. I phone them up and ask some questions around certain things that might have been implemented locally that I just wanted to double check a few things, and they're really good actually. They're really good and supportive. So give them a call, or even if you need some advice personally yourself, they're really helpful on the helpline. And then obviously there's lots and lots of resources on the contact website that you can use as well. So that's the end of our session. Helen, I think, has already popped in the chat that you will get a short questionnaire at the end. We do ask that you complete that. It's really important that we know what's helpful for you, any further topics that you might want to see coming up. And then the recording of today's session will be on the website in the next couple of weeks, and you'll be notified when that goes up. So is there anything else, Sarah, that you want to add that I may have forgotten?
Just a huge thank you, Ruth. You've been amazing. Your short guide to setting up and running a kick. Everything's on there. What a fount of all knowledge and wisdom.
I don't know about that. Thank you. I'm hoping that it's helpful for people. And if you do think of anything afterwards, then just pop an email across and the guys at Contact will help. And if they know where I am.
Thanks, Ruth. Okay. Thank you very much, everybody. And we'll now end the session for everybody. Thank you so much, Ruth.
Thanks, everyone. Nice to see you all. Bye.